And now, folks, it's time to say goodnight. We sincerely appreciate your patronage and hope we've succeeded in bringing you an enjoyable evening of entertainment. Please drive home carefully and come back again soon. Good night.
When designing this model, I had one original idea in mind. What would Thomas look like with guns? Or more, what if Thomas was militarized or put in a World War II-like scenario? I also know there were no actual E2s that were militarized during World War II, but like, Thomas didn't serve in World War II either. I mean, that movie never really came out, so I mean, like, it doesn't really matter, I can do what I want. I started first by using a Dremel tool to put the bullet holes on the side of Thomas. Both sides have 4 bullet holes, but I wanted to spread them out a little bit more and not have them in the same place to be a little bit more realistic. I used black paint to fill in the bullet holes, and then brown rustic weathering powder to give them a more authentic look. I followed the same process with black weathering powder and a little bit more of the rustic brown weathering powder around the body, and sealed it in with a coat of matte clear. I also guess it's worth noting that I painted this part in here black, but everybody normally does that because Bachmann's lazy and doesn't do it themselves. When designing Thomas, I had the idea of a World War II Jeep in mind, rather than that of an actual tank or something like that. So on the back of Thomas, I not only added another bullet hole, but also different miscellaneous parts that are reminiscent of that of a Jeep. Featured on Thomas is an actual Jeep wheel that I painted blue and weathered to match the body, as well as a gas can and a spare gear. It also wouldn't be right if Thomas didn't have a way to defend himself, so I decided to put a 50 caliber on the top right part of his cab, that I also weathered again to match the body. On the front of Thomas, I decided to fit another gas can, just as a spare I guess, as well as an old headlamp that I had, as I felt it just kind of matched the aesthetic that Thomas had. I put a little bit of black weathering powder just on his face to match that overall grimy look, and with another coat of matte clear, Thomas was done. I know the tools that I put on Thomas are not fitting for that of an E2, or let alone a tank engine, but I imagine Thomas as more of a support role rather than that of an armored train. I figured the tools that he has are for other vehicles that he's supporting in combat. Because of this, I am totally making an armored train, though. He's just not done yet, so you are going to have to wait for that. Now that he's complete, I'm beyond happy with how Thomas actually turned out. I've always been interested in the history of World War II, and imagining Thomas in that was definitely fun. So much so that I am not kidding, I have started making a whole fleet. Sodor is about to be armed to the teeth, and whenever everything opens back up, I can't wait to take him to a train show. I'm sure he'll definitely turn some eyes. To see updates and even more of these models, follow me on Instagram at TrainBoy. I keep up with the work I do there a lot better and totally had the link in my channel info wrong, but it's fixed now, I promise. Hopefully you guys like this custom model and the ones that are coming after it as much as I do. Trust me, it became an obsession and I have a lot planned now. And thank you all again for watching. I'll do my best to post more model work on YouTube, especially as projects are completed, but for now, hopefully you guys enjoyed my World War II style Thomas. Not too long ago, I decided to make a custom model Thomas, one that was a bit different than any other model that I had made before, as I'm sure you can tell by looking at it. The idea of this Thomas was a Thomas styled after a World War II Jeep, featuring several support-like items that could be used by the soldiers around him, whether it's the extra gas can or the extra Jeep tire. I just always saw Thomas as more of a support role, rather than being the heavy hitter necessarily. I would give Thomas a headlamp as well as a 50 caliber machine gun on his roof, and from there honestly leave the model alone, as I had a bit of a creative burnout with the World War II models, not really finding them very enjoyable to make anymore, and truth be told I still kinda feel this way, but with the Thomas model just sitting there and constantly staring at me, eventually I got a bit of an itch to do more to him. Honestly, in terms of realism, this model has been out of the window. He literally has bullet holes in his side tanks, but even still I wanted to see if I could add a bit more realism to him, and that's what I would set out to do, codenaming the project Blackout Branch Line. Now, in World War II it wasn't uncommon to quote-unquote black out a steam engine, and this had multiple meanings to it. In most cases it meant painting the entire engine black, this making the engines harder to find in the nighttime, as to avoid air attacks, but in some cases a large black tarp would be put over the locomotive's cab, more in an attempt to hide the fire, and it's this idea that I would try to employ with my model, as personally I don't feel as if Thomas would be too keen on giving up his blue livery, even during wartime, and as such I would handcraft a large black tarp to put over his body, as with this he'd be a lot harder to notice from the vantage of an airplane. Thomas Thomas is very much the same still featuring the added details on his back and front, as well as the bullet holes on either side, but I would end up removing his 50 caliber to fit the tarp, as well as removed his front lamp, changed his face, and added a new headlamp. Code-wise, the lamp isn't in a very realistic spot, but seeing as this Thomas would likely be running in the nighttime, I figure it would help give him a better view, even if the point is him being blacked out. It's fine. While part of me enjoyed the smile that Thomas had, I would end up changing it to this determined face, as not only does it make Thomas look a bit more serious, but I feel helps to convey the severity of the situation that he's in. Just like I did with the smile, I would weather it with charcoal weathering powder, more in an attempt to match the body, and once this was added, I really feel as if it helped to bring the model together. I know because it's not realistic, a lot of people don't really like the World War II Thomas, but I still wanted to keep it the same way that it looked before, as I don't imagine Thomas's role has changed, I just want him to look a little bit more fitting into that role. I also would shape the tarp in a way to make it look like the figure in Thomas's cab was peeking out, making sure everything's okay, and while the large tarp makes the front windows of the cab basically unusable, I imagine that Thomas has the front covered, being a talking tank engine and all. He would likely see what's in front of him first anyway, so I honestly considered it a small price to pay. Just for fun, I would go back and weather his sides and bullet holes just a little bit more, and of course gave it a coat of matte clear, and with that my updated Thomas was pretty much complete, and thankfully I could call this operation a success. So now that we know what I did to Thomas, let's actually see this guy in action. Now, like I said before, I still am in a bit of a creative rut with the World War II trains. And not because I don't have any ideas, more because I just really don't enjoy making them the same way that I did before. It kinda gets tiring putting bullet holes in all of your favorite characters and all of your trains, and honestly, it's just not something that I want to do all the time. But clearly it's a project that I still like to go back to, so don't take that as me saying I'm not making them anymore at all, it's just one of those things that I like to take my time with. And truth be told, there's other model projects that interest me a lot more. But no matter how I crack it, this still is one of my favorite modifications, and there's always another project on the workbench. The history of World War II is something that I've always been fascinated with, and it was fun to try to bring those interests together, and that's what this model is meant to be above all. Just a fun project, and though it took me a while to get back to it, I couldn't be more happy with the results. It's definitely going to turn some heads at the next model convention, and hopefully you guys enjoyed it too. If you guys did enjoy, be sure to like and subscribe as there's always more train stuff on the way. And as always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.
As with all fire, we must know when to fire if we're to shoot to kill. First then, let us prevent the rifle. Spread it up to 2,000 yards. But normally, fire should not be opened above 600 unless the target is extremely favorable. The shorter the range, the greater the accuracy. Shoot to kill.
After what felt like an eternity, I was finally able to complete my World War II Militarized Percy model. I was projecting to have Percy done a long time ago, but due to the mail being slow and actually getting me the parts, it ended up taking a lot longer than I originally thought. But nonetheless, I'm happy with how this model turned out, and even more so to call this project completed, at least for now. As you can probably tell, I decided to take a different approach with Percy. Admittedly, at first I was considering putting bullet holes in Percy just like I had done with Gordon and Thomas. But knowing the character of Percy, it's just hard to imagine him in that scenario or even in the front lines period. So instead I decided to weather and detail Percy, not much different than how he would look in the show, and instead would focus on a consist for Percy. At the moment, this consists of a Bachmann Great Western van that's been weathered, as well as a, well, beyond fucking troublesome truck that I would fit with an artillery cannon and detail with bullet holes. Ultimately, I would decide against putting bullet holes in Percy, but figured it was fitting to have it at least somewhere in the consist. Though I love the look of the overall consist while it's together, let's take a look at each individual part of it and see what I did to them, starting with Percy. I of course decided to fit Percy with a more fitting and proper face, and while at the moment I haven't done anything about his side step ladders, though I plan to in the future, I would add a little bit of red paint on his back lamp as well as a lot of black weathering powder around his body. Being my only Percy model, I wanted it to be able to double as not only a World War II or militarized Percy, but also as just a dirty and put upon looking one. And thankfully I feel like I was able to achieve that well. Next, I would move on to the Great Western Van, and with this one there's not really a lot to talk about. The completion of the Great Western Van would overall be pretty easy. All I would do was take a paintbrush and some black weathering powder and work it between the planks of wood. I considered putting bullet holes in the van as well, but would overall decide against it, as just like Percy, I wanted it to be able to double as a standard or a militarized feature. And lastly and most importantly, what really makes this the militarized consist it is the troublesome truck that I've made here. In real life, a cannon that large would probably crush a plank wagon, but we're not going for realism anymore, boys. Of course, I would fit the troublesome truck with bullet holes on either side, as well as a couple other small details. For example, this little brake wheel that I would add to the back of it. I imagine if there were ever to be a wagon like this in real life, it would probably be pretty heavy and need a braking system of its own. Not the most realistic detail, but a fun one nonetheless. I would follow the wagon around its sides with a mix of black and rustic brown weathering powder. I would add a little bit of powder on the face and in some areas weather up the gun as well, and would place little spare and scrap parts inside of it. At the moment, just being two little red wheels as well as a US Army ammo crate box. I would prefer if it said Royal Artillery or something like that, but for the moment it'll do. Coupling them all together then completes the mobile AA gun. The cannon in the back is movable and does rotate about 180 degrees, but for running purposes I prefer to keep it stationary. My Percy model is significantly different in comparison to my Thomas and Gordon model, and that was done for a reason. As I stated, it's hard to imagine Percy in a warlike scenario just being the young and kind engine that he is. However, one of the sad realities of World War II is that people who were too young to be fighting were often called upon to. So, in a way, it still does work out, but with that being said, I didn't want him to be on the front lines where Thomas and Gordon would be. I imagine that Percy stays behind the front lines and uses this consist to function like a mobile AA gun, focusing instead on taking out enemy aircraft and shelling the enemy from a distance rather than actually being on the front lines itself, keeping Percy safe while also giving him the chance to contribute. While Percy himself isn't directly militarized like that of Thomas and Gordon, I still wanted to give Percy a role in the militarized armada that I've been creating, and thankfully I was able to do that without putting Percy directly in danger, but also was able to do something new and unique in doing so. Just like my other World War II customs, it may not be the most realistic, but it damn sure is intimidating. Percy was one of my favorite characters growing up, so it was definitely fun being able to put him in this aesthetic, but in other ways a challenge seeing as his character didn't seem to fit into the role. However, militarizing his consist instead of him directly, I personally think helped him fit into the situation a bit more properly. I'm quite happy with how this Percy model turned out, and at this rate, it's kind of impossible to stop, so let me know who you guys would like to see next. A lot of people have recommended me to do a James, and that is my favorite character, so I have been thinking about it. However, I'm still stuck on who and what the next model exactly will be. So, on the chance you guys have any ideas or anything like that, be sure to comment down below and let me know. Again, I would like to apologize for how long this model took me to finish. The post and waiting for the parts for it kinda had this project stuck in the water for a little bit, but I'm happy to finally call Percy and his militarization, at least for now, completed. Hopefully it was worth the wait, and thank you guys for watching.
Whatever the cost may be, we shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets, we shall fight in the hills, we shall never surrender.
Even against enemy aircraft, especially when flying low, rifles and light automatics are deadly if fire is properly controlled. But with anti-aircraft fire, as with all fire, we must know when to fire if we're to shoot to kill.
After completing my World War II Jeep-inspired Thomas, I figured I would make a heavy type of locomotive to fit in with my growing fleet. And to do this, I ended up using my Bachmann Gordon just because, well, who else would be the Sodor heavy type? You mean to tell me Henry's gonna let them put a turret on him and go burn down his forest? I don't think so. Gordon is named the Royal Scot after the headboard that I placed in front of his funnel. Though the original Royal Scot is a Class 6100 and Gordon is an A1 Pacific, in the little world that I've created for the engines, I imagine that Gordon wears it in memory of that engine. Perhaps he lost a friend to the war and thus he wears it, but don't game theory me on it yet. I just thought it was a nice touch. I know a lot of people say that the blue that the engines are isn't necessarily wartime accurate, and you're completely and totally right. Driving a blue engine in wartime would probably suck. But I still want to capture the overall character and look of the characters, and that's what I was trying to do with Gordon, so I figured I would just still stick with the blue. Accuracy is kind of low-key been out of the window. Now, again, I imagine Gordon as the Sodor heavy type, or more like an armored train. Just like Thomas, I used a Dremel tool on either side of Gordon to apply the bullet holes, and then used weathering powder and paint to make them look realistic. At some point, I may actually add armor castings, but at this point, I just didn't find it too necessary. Since Gordon is a high standard and quick to impress engine, I wanted to keep the weathering more minimal on him and not as heavy as it was on Thomas, but I went heavier with the coal dust around his tender just to make him look a little bit more used. Gordon's tender is also fitted with a tail lamp, just as the front of him is fitted with a headlamp because Bachmann just couldn't be bothered. And after applying some coal dust on his face and a coat of matte clear, the main aesthetics were done. For the most part. Being Sodor's heavy and soon to be armored train, I figured Gordon deserved something a little heavier than a 50 caliber. Though there is totally one on there. Using a spare Flames of War Sherman turret, I fitted Gordon with a rotary cannon on his top half and painted it blue and weathered it to match him. At the moment I have it glued to sit stationarily, but I do plan to change that in the future given the giant hole in his top. I cut down and placed the top half of an HO scale figure in the turret, and of course gave him a proper crew to run and operate with. Though there's more I plan to do with Gordon down the road, for example fit him with wagons on either side and fit the proper armored train makeup, overall I still love how he turned out. Personally, I haven't really seen a lot done with Bachmann Gordon, especially in the World War II aspect, so just like it was for Thomas, it was incredibly fun overall fitting Gordon into the whole aesthetic and growing armada that is my World War II Thomas fleet. And of course it's just not going to end here with Gordon and Thomas. I have several other plans that are on the workbench and in progress that should be done soon, so make sure you're on the lookout for those. As previously stated, Sodor will be armed to the teeth, so for now, hopefully you guys enjoyed my World War II inspired Gordon model. As some of you guys already know, recently I would purchase a Bachmann Gordon, one that would show up in a less than ideal condition. I know to a lot of people some missing lining and a couple paint chips really aren't that big of a deal, but personally I'm very picky about the condition my models are in, especially if they're ones that I plan to use heavily, so to see it all would be a bit bothering, and I wasn't sure what I should do with the Gordon next. After Gordon sat for a little bit, I decided to reach out to a friend of mine, Austerity, who recently has been making some of the most crazy customs I've ever seen, and I thought to myself, if there's anybody who's going to be able to make this Gordon look amazing, it's gonna be this guy. So we sat to work on figuring out what we could make of him. The only thing I knew for certain was I wanted this Gordon to have smoke deflectors, as the person who sent me Gordon sent me those as well, and after actually putting them onto Gordon, I enjoyed the look, but other than that, we weren't really too sure. I decided to look at the real-life basis of Gordon, the closest being the actual Flying Scotsman, and came down on the Flying Scotsman's wartime livery. Well, not only worn in wartime, but also in 2016, which is not only when the Flying Scotsman returned to Steam, but also unveiled in this livery. And once Austerity saw that, it was game over. And who better to tell you how this model came together than the man himself? So let me pass the mic over to him so he can explain to you how Gordon came together.
So when Lance first messaged me, the original idea was to just weather the model heavily because it was missing some lining, but he threw out the idea of painting Gordon in wartime black, and I thought the idea would be really cool because you don't see stuff like that often. So I said I liked the idea and we rocked with it. So the package showed up last Wednesday, and when I got home I started work on painting the wheels because to me that's the hardest part. You can't really prime wheels without ruining them, so it takes like a good 4 or 5 coats to cover them all the way. After that I primed the body and started working with the coats of black paint, which is a lot easier because it can't really mess it up when you're painting something all one color. After that I did the buffer beams red with a Sharpie paint marker and did the buffers and some other details with a silver one and started weathering. The next step was adding decals, including the NE and number 4, which were on the tender and cab. These were made by Fox Transfers, and they're specifically the Cheltenham Bold in gold with red shadow. I actually ripped one of the end details when I was applying it, but I was able to put it back together and cover up the tear with some weathering dust. The final step was spraying the matte clear coat. This project was actually super fun to work on. I learned a lot about weathering while I made it, and it was my first time working with the Bachmann Thomas engine, which are a lot more simple than the models I usually work with, but it also helped me learn about working with more basic stuff. I really enjoyed making this model, and Lance was a super nice dude the entire time I made it. It was a pleasure working with him. If you don't already know, my Twitter is at austerity1943, and there I post customs where I take my own approach to the standard NWR fleet. And I actually have a bunch of new models coming up in the next couple of days and weeks that I think a lot of people will enjoy. And if you like what I've done here with this Gordon, my commissions are open. Thanks so much to Lance for coming to me with this project and everyone who's helped me get to where I am today. I only started modeling in the last 2 months or so, but I've been growing super fast and it really means a lot to me that people have been supporting it. I'll stop blabbing now and give the mic back to the host. See ya.
So now that we know how the man himself made this model, number one, go follow him. Right now, this is not a drill. This is not a drill, ladies and gentlemen. Go follow him. But also, Gordon was missing a face. As you saw in the work in progress pictures, Austerity was kind enough to fit him with a smokebox door during that time, but when he got back to me, he was in need of one. And the one I would use would actually be a normal Bachmann one. All I would do was take the faceplate itself, spray it with a new primer, and redraw on his eyebrows. And honestly, I really like how it came out. It really goes to show you, if it's this easy for me to do it, like, Bachmann, what are you doing? Come on. But now all I needed to do was fit it onto Gordon, and once that was done, the model was complete. Once again, huge shout out to Austerity for this. When I set out to get my number 4, the last thing I expected was to get one that was so special. And the fact that this loco is now part of my collection is insane to me. If any of you guys are ever interested in commission work, I heavily suggest you reach out to this guy. He was a pleasure to work with the entire time, and really made sure the final product was something I would be happy with. I know it's very scary to actually commission people. I know I myself have had bad experiences doing such, but the entire process of working with Austerity was nothing of the sort. And after this banger of a model, he and I have been talking about what could be next, so expect to see more of his work soon. So now that we know how Gordon was made and where his face came from, let's see how this guy runs. I know I keep saying it, but shout out to Austerity for helping me make this model. The Bachmann Gordon model was a model that I was already pretty critical of, and he would take the more sorry condition that it was in and completely turn it around. I couldn't be more satisfied with this model, and every time I run him on the layout, I can't help but do it proudly. Speaking of the layout, I'm currently waiting on a couple of parts to make it in the mail, and when they do, I'll likely be posting another layout update, since I know a lot of you guys have been wanting to see it, and trust me, I've been wanting to show you guys as well. You can already guess it is not the same as it was last time you saw it, but with how indecisive and picky I am, it constantly changes. Though I think I finally come down on something that I'll be happy with. And once it's all complete, I promise I'll show you guys first thing. And I can't wait to see this guy and the other locomotives at home on it. If you haven't already, be sure to follow Austerity on Twitter, and if you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe for even more train content. There's always new visitors to the railway and locomotives that come from abroad. That's right, I actually bought an American one for once, and soon there will be plenty to show you guys. I was just so excited to actually get this Gordon, and as such wanted to show you guys as quickly as I could. And hopefully you guys enjoyed seeing that process with me and Austerity himself. As always, thank you guys again for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.